Hello, my name's Alan Foom, and today I'm going to talk about energy-related CO2 emissions in America. This is data from the Energy Information Administration, an American government agency that put out very good bulletins. So I've jotted it up and we'll just go through it. So this is energy emissions by fuel type. So at the bottom of the graph, in grey you have coal, in sky blue you have natural gas, and the red colours are different types of oil use. So the red here is motor gasoline, this is diesel, and then you've got other things like natural gas liquids, kerosene, jet fuel, residual fuel oil, that's the heavier end of the oil spectrum, and also other petroleum products. So overall, emissions peaked in 2007. Up until 2019 there was a slow decline, total of 14%, which is not insignificant. And then there's a further fall in 2020, so we're now, or were last year, at 76% in America of 2009 emissions. This is mainly, the majority of the decline is due to the reduction in use of coal, which is the most carbon intensive of the fossil fuels. So we'll now have a look at the share of emissions by the different fuels. So in this pie chart, dark grey is coal, which is 21% of emissions. Then you have natural gas, which has a lion's share of emissions, although it's the most efficient fuel in terms of carbon emissions. So per unit of electricity, gas is typically half the emissions of coal, which is the main reason for the fall of emissions. And then the 46% here are different types of oil. So red is motor gasoline, this dark red is diesel, the orange is jet fuel. So these are the main uses. Then you have residual fuel oils, natural gas liquids, etc. So these are the other bits of the oil spectrum that are being used. Overall in 2020 we had an 11% fall in emissions. That's enormous. And that's due almost entirely to restrictions caused as a result of their responses to the COVID epidemic. The largest absolute decline was in coal emissions, so coal is here. Now that's probably secular, a continuation of a secular trend. Coal emissions have been declining for a long time due to a fall in coal use, and this has now been to some extent accelerated. Motor gasoline and jet fuel also had significant falls. The bars are the absolute falls, the line are percentage falls in relative percentage terms, and slightly less for diesel, slightly less for natural gas. There's been a little bit of minor spike in growth in kerosene, which is not used for jet fuel. Most kerosene is used in jet fuel. So in the lowest declines have been natural gas liquefied and natural gas liquids and natural gas. So that's natural gas liquids are propane, butane, etc. Mainly used in industrial processes, some used for heat. So that's going on, a significant decline to do with the fall in significant economic activity. So which sectors have been impacted the most? This is the CO2 emissions from energy graph, but it's charted by end user. So at the bottom, the light orange and the dark orange are residential, that's domestic. The light orange is electricity, and the dark orange is domestic heat, effectively. Then you have commercial, again electricity and heat, although there are other uses as well. Then you have the reds are industry, so it's industrial electricity and industrial heat. And then the blues are transport, which is almost entirely non-electrified. There's a bit of electrification in transport, that's mainly trains and subways. So New York subway is electric, for example. And a small share of electric cars, perhaps. So overall, full start in 2007, declined, then fall back again. So again, looking at the end user sectors, 37%, slightly more than a third, is gasoline, is transport. So that includes gasoline, that includes jet fuel, so that's planes, trains, automobiles and boats. This slice of the pie is residential, both in terms of electricity and non-electricity use. This is commercial, again electricity, non-electricity, and this is industrial, again electricity and non-electricity, so industrial heat. Things like steel plants, chemical plants, etc. that use a lot of heat. So electricity overall is just over 31.5% of total CO2 emissions in America. So if you're going to cut emissions, which they have been doing, much of that has been concentrated on that, but we need to, if you wanted to do that, you would need to put some effort into this slice and this slice of the pie. Again, in terms of declines, all sectors have had a decline. The biggest decline, unsurprisingly, has been the transportation sector due to the lockdowns, fewer planes flying, fewer people driving, etc. Biggest absolute decline is transportation. Biggest relative decline is actually electricity in transportation, so that's trains. New York subway being shut down or being severely restricted, you use less electricity, although it's a very small part of the sector. Relatively smaller falls in terms of residential, in terms of commercial other, in terms of industry. Commercial electricity has declined quite a bit, industrial electricity has declined quite a bit. So overall, again, roughly 11%, and 10.6% of emissions decline in electricity. So, a significant impact of the pandemic and its responses. If you're looking at CO2 emissions per capita, now what we have to bear in mind is the US population has grown significantly. In 1973, there were 211 million Americans. Now there are 332 million. We're talking a very large increase in capita, yet the emissions per capita have declined. So first of all, we had a decline in 1973. With the 1973 oil crisis recession, you had all these gas lines with gas guzzlers trying to fill up. People became more efficient. There was a bit of a recovery after that. Then a massive decline in 1979, again, oil price related. So that bottomed out in the early 1980s, and then you had a very slow rise in per capita. Effectively, it's a plateau, but slow rise to about 2000 to the late 1990s, then a relative flat line till then. And then roughly 2006, 2007 started kicking off. Now, there are two factors within that. First of all, you had the global financial crisis, decline in the economy and decline in industry. And then you had the rise of fracking, rise of unconventional gas, which started displacing coal in power generation. So that led to a secular decline in the last decade or so, and then the fall in 2020 to COVID. So per capita, the US is on a declining trend in terms of emissions. Quite what will happen after COVID, nobody knows. There'll be a recovery, but how it will recover, we don't know. Also, the new administration may do things a little bit differently, but then the states do. Individual states that are in charge of energy policy do things under their own steam. So it's kind of complicated and a bit difficult to predict. Looking at overall primary energy in the USA, so this is a chart from the BP Statistical Review of World Energy. And again, coal in dark grey, oil in red, gas in light blue, nuclear in yellow, hydro in dark blue, tail here of the new renewables, so that's wind in dark green, solar in light green, and a sort of browny red for the others. You can see that effectively energy use plateaued in the early 2000s. It declined a little bit as part of the global financial crisis. This is the spike, and then continued with a slow rise despite a significant increase in population. And these are the early recessions, the 1973 and the early 1980s. So overall, a story of relative flatlining, decline in coal, increase in gas due to fracking, due to unconventionals. This is an interesting chart, which is two pie charts, one from the year 2000, one from 2019. And what you notice is that they both have roughly the same total amount of energy use, despite a significant growth in population between the two years. 95 versus 94.6 exajoules, which is what BP used for their measure. Again, oil in red, 40% versus 39%, no change effectively. Gas, significant increase from 24% of the total to 32% of the total. Coal, halved, from 24% of the total to 12% of the total. Nuclear stayed the same, hydro very little change, and a bit of a growth in renewables. So renewables are now about 4% of total primary energy use in 2019. An awful lot of noise, but still early stages. And basically the switch from coal to gas is the reason emissions have fallen. And if you look at US emissions per unit of primary energy, so this effectively you take the BP data from primary energy and you divide that by emissions, what you see is a gradual slow decline from 1973 till about 2008 as people became more efficient, people became less wasteful, and then a more rapid decline from 2008 to 2019 with switch to gas. Now again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen in 2020. BP tend to release their data from the World Statistical Review about May and June time, so that's something to look forward to. But what you see is an understanding of where CO2 emissions come from in US energy and where things might be going in the future. Thank you very much.